Sarah Okafor had always been a romantic at heart. Growing up in Lagos, Nigeria, she believed in the idea of soulmates and fairy tale love. At 32, she had a stable career as a fashion designer, but her personal life was far from perfect. Her past relationships had either ended in betrayal or heartbreak, leaving her skeptical about love. But loneliness has a way of creeping in, and on one fateful evening, Sarah made a decision that would change her life forever. She joined an online dating platform. It didn't take long before she received a message from a man named Kwame Mensah. He was a 38-year-old businessman from Accra, Ghana, and his profile painted the picture of a wealthy, well-traveled entrepreneur. With a charming smile and deep, intelligent eyes, Kwame seemed too good to be true. But as they began talking, Sarah found herself drawn to him. He was attentive, kind, and said all the right things. Unlike the men she had dated in the past, Kwame made her feel special. Their online romance blossomed quickly. They spent hours texting and video calling each other. Kwame spoke about his business ventures, his love for African culture, and his desire to settle down with the right woman. He told Sarah she was beautiful, intelligent, and exactly what he had been looking for. Sarah, who had never experienced such devotion, began to fall deeply in love. "Sarah, I want to build a future with you," Kwame said one evening during a late-night video call. "I don't just want a girlfriend, I want a wife. Someone to share my dreams with." Sarah's heart raced. No man had ever been so direct about his intentions. While her friends warned her about online relationships, she chose to believe Kwame was different. He had never asked her for money or made suspicious requests. Instead, he constantly reassured her of his love, sending her gifts and money to show his sincerity. After months of daily communication, Kwame proposed. He wanted Sarah to come to Ghana so they could finally meet in person and plan their wedding. At first, she hesitated. Traveling to a foreign country for a man she had never met in real life seemed risky. But Kwame was persuasive. "Why wait any longer? We are meant to be together. Come, my love. Let's make this official." Blinded by love and excitement, Sarah convinced herself that this was her destiny. She packed her bags, bought her flight ticket, and prepared to leave Nigeria behind for what she believed would be the start of a beautiful new chapter. Little did she know, she was walking straight into a nightmare. Sarah Okafor's heart pounded with excitement as her plane touched down at Kotoka International Airport in Accra, Ghana. This was it, the moment she had been waiting for. After months of virtual love, she was finally going to meet the man who had captured her heart. As she stepped off the plane and made her way through immigration, a mix of emotions rushed through her. Excitement, nervousness, and a small, unshakable sense of fear. Her best friend, Amaka, had warned her not to take such a big risk, but Sarah had brushed off her concerns. After all, Kwame had never given her a reason to doubt him. When she walked into the arrival hall, she spotted him immediately. Kwame Mensah stood near the exit, holding a bouquet of red roses. He was just as handsome as his pictures, tall, well-dressed, and exuding confidence. The moment their eyes met, he smiled and opened his arms wide. "Sarah, my love," he said warmly as she approached. Sarah felt an overwhelming sense of relief. He was real. The romance wasn't a scam, and she hadn't been foolish for believing in love. She melted into his embrace, inhaling the faint scent of his cologne. "You look even more beautiful in person," Kwame whispered in her ear. Blushing, Sarah giggled. "And you look even more charming." Kwame led her to a sleek black SUV parked outside the airport. As they drove through the bustling streets of Accra, Sarah marveled at the city's beauty, its mix of modern high-rises and historic landmarks. Kwame pointed out various places, promising to take her sightseeing once she settled in. "I've planned a special welcome dinner for you tonight," he said, squeezing her hand. "I want you to meet some of my close friends." Sarah beamed. Everything felt perfect, almost like a fairy tale. Kwame took Sarah to his home, an upscale apartment in a gated community. It was spacious and elegantly furnished, with expensive decor that reflected wealth and status. "This is beautiful," Sarah said, admiring the luxurious living room. "Only the best for my future wife," Kwame replied, flashing a smile. He guided her to the bedroom, where a neatly arranged wardrobe awaited her. "I had this space prepared for you," he said, Sarah felt like the luckiest woman alive. She had taken a leap of faith and it had paid off. That evening, as promised, Kwame hosted a dinner party. Several of his friends attended. Mostly men, well-dressed and polite, but there was something about them that made Sarah uneasy. They all seemed too interested in her, asking personal questions about her family, her finances, and whether anyone knew exactly where she was staying. "You must really love Kwame to leave everything behind and come here alone," one of them, a man named Kojo, said with a smirk. Sarah chuckled nervously. Of course, love requires taking risks, right? Kojo and the others exchanged glances before laughing. It was an unsettling kind of laughter, one that made Sarah's stomach twist. Later that night, while Kwame was in the shower, Sarah overheard a hushed conversation between him and Kojo. "Is she the one?" Kojo asked. "She's perfect," Kwame replied. Sarah's blood ran cold. She wasn't sure what they were talking about, but something about the way Kwame said those words felt wrong. She shook the feeling off. Maybe she was overthinking things. Maybe it was just nerves. But deep down, something inside her whispered, "Run." Sarah woke up the next morning feeling a strange heaviness in her chest. The unsettling conversation she had overheard between Kwame and Kojo the previous night still lingered in her mind. But she convinced herself that she was being paranoid. "This is just nerves," she muttered to herself as she stepped into the shower. After all, Kwame had been nothing but sweet and attentive since her arrival. Maybe she was simply overanalyzing things. She had taken a huge step, traveling to another country for love, and it was natural to feel a little uncertain. When she walked into the living room, Kwame was already dressed, sipping coffee as he scrolled through his phone. He looked up and smiled. "Good morning, my queen. I hope you slept well," he said, pulling her in for a kiss. Sarah nodded. "Yes, I did. So, have you thought about when we'll finalize our wedding plans?" Kwame's smile faltered for just a second, so quick that if Sarah hadn't been watching closely, she might have missed it. "Of course, love. I was just about to discuss that with you," he said smoothly. "There are a few things we need to take care of first. I need to get some documents ready, and I also want you to meet my family before we proceed." Sarah felt a flicker of disappointment. She had expected things to move a little faster, considering how eager Kwame had been before she arrived. But she nodded in understanding. "All right, when do I get to meet your family?" she asked. Kwame hesitated again. "Soon. I just need to arrange a proper introduction." Something felt off, but Sarah didn't want to seem too pushy. She had already come this far. She could wait a little longer. What was supposed to be a short stay in Ghana stretched into weeks. Every time Sarah brought up the wedding, Kwame came up with an excuse. First, he claimed his mother had fallen ill, so they needed to postpone. Then, he said his business was facing unexpected issues, and he needed to sort them out before thinking about marriage. Sarah began to feel uneasy. She had put her life in Nigeria on hold for this man. She had spent all her savings on this trip, believing she was coming to start a new life. But now, she was stuck in a foreign country with no clear direction. To make matters worse, Kwame's behavior had started to change. He was no longer as affectionate as before. Some nights, he wouldn't come home at all. He'd claim he was handling business, but he never shared any details with her. Sarah started to feel like a stranger in the man's life she had traveled so far for. A chilling discovery. One afternoon, while Kwame was out, Sarah decided to tidy up the apartment. As she was rearranging his drawers, she found a small, locked box. Curiosity got the best of her, and she searched for the key. After a few minutes, she found it hidden under some papers. Her heart pounded as she opened the box. Inside, she found multiple women's IDs and passports. Her hands trembled as she flipped through them. Some of the names sounded foreign. Some passports belonged to women from Nigeria just like her. A sick feeling twisted in her stomach. Who were these women? Why did Kwame have their passports? Just then, she heard the front door creak open. She quickly shut the box, locked it, and shoved the key back where she found it. She rushed to the living room, trying to compose herself as Kwame walked in. He looked at her with a piercing gaze, as if sensing something had changed. "You okay, my love?" he asked. Sarah forced a smile. "Yes, just feeling a little tired." Kwame walked up to her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Good. Get some rest. We have a special dinner tonight. Sarah nodded, but deep down, she knew she had to get out of there. Something was very, very wrong, and she feared that if she didn't act fast, she would never make it back home. Sarah barely touched her food that night. She sat across from Kwame at the candlelit dinner table, her stomach churning with anxiety. Her mind raced with questions she was too afraid to ask. Who were the women in those passports? What had happened to them? And most importantly, was she next? Kwame, as usual, was his charming self, raising his glass of wine in a toast to their future together. But for the first time since she arrived in Ghana, Sarah saw through his facade. There was something cold behind his eyes, something that sent a shiver down her spine. She had to leave. She had to leave tonight. Lying awake in bed that night, Sarah carefully formulated a plan. She knew she couldn't just walk out. Kwame had control over everything. He had taken her passport for safekeeping when she first arrived, and she had no access to her bank account. But she did have one thing: her phone. Earlier that day, she had turned on her VPN and sent a cryptic message to her best friend, Amaka, back in Nigeria. Something isn't right. I need help. Please track my location. Amaka had responded almost immediately. What happened? Are you safe? Sarah didn't dare explain everything, but she sent another message. I need to get out of here. Call the embassy. Now, as she lay beside Kwame, pretending to sleep, she waited. Waited for an opportunity. Waited for a miracle. Around 2 a.m., Sarah finally heard what she had been hoping for: Kwame's deep, rhythmic breathing. He was asleep. Carefully, she slipped out of bed, her heart pounding as she tiptoed toward the living room. She needed her passport. If she could retrieve it, she could at least try to find help. She moved swiftly, opening the drawer where she had seen the small box earlier. But just as her fingers brushed against the lock, a voice behind her sent ice through her veins. What are you doing, my love? Sarah froze. Slowly, she turned to see Kwame standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. His usually warm smile was gone, replaced by something darker. He knew. Sarah's pulse pounded in her ears. She forced a nervous laugh. I was just looking for my earrings, she lied. Kwame stepped closer, his gaze drilling into her. Your earrings? His voice was low, almost mocking. She nodded quickly. Yes. I thought I dropped them earlier. Kwame tilted his head, studying her. Then, in one swift motion, he grabbed her wrist. Are you lying to me, Sarah? Sarah's breath caught in her throat. No, I swear. He yanked her closer, his grip tightening. You see, I have a problem with liars. Sarah's mind screamed run. Before she could react, he shoved her backward. She stumbled, crashing against the table. Panic surged through her as she scrambled to her feet, but Kwame was already towering over her. His voice was calm, but his eyes burned with rage. You should have just played along. Sarah realized in that moment, she wasn't getting out of this easily, and if she didn't fight back, she wouldn't get out at all. Sarah's breath came in sharp, panicked gasps. The dim light from the hallway cast eerie shadows over Kwame's face, making him look even more menacing. His grip on her wrist tightened, sending a jolt of pain up her arm. Her mind screamed at her to fight, to run. But how? Kwame was bigger, stronger. The front door was locked, and she had no idea where he had kept the key. But she knew one thing for certain. If she didn't fight now, she wouldn't live to see the morning. Summoning every ounce of strength, Sarah twisted her wrist sharply, breaking free from Kwame's grip. Before he could react, she grabbed the nearest object, a glass bottle from the dining table, and swung it with all her might. Crash! The bottle shattered against Kwame's face. He let out a guttural cry, staggering back as blood trickled down his cheek. Sarah didn't wait to see the damage. She turned and bolted toward the front door, yanking at the handle in desperation. Locked. Behind her, she heard Kwame growl in anger. You think you can run from me, Sarah? She spun around just in time to see him lunge at her. She dodged, barely avoiding his grasp. But he was fast. Too fast. Within seconds, he grabbed a fistful of her hair, yanking her backward. Pain shot through her scalp as she let out a scream. Shut up! Kwame snarled, slamming her against the wall. Sarah gasped as the impact knocked the wind out of her. She kicked wildly, her knee connecting with his stomach. He grunted, momentarily loosening his grip. She seized the moment, clawing at his face, her nails digging into his wounded cheek. Kwame roared in pain. "You bitch!" Sarah barely had time to react before he reached into his pocket and pulled out a knife. Her blood turned to ice. Kwame's eyes burned with rage as he stepped toward her, blade glinting under the dim light. "This didn't have to happen," he said, voice low and deadly. "You were supposed to be mine." Sarah's heart pounded. She scanned the room frantically for a weapon, anything she could use to defend herself. Then she saw it. The broken glass shards from the bottle lay scattered across the floor. Before Kwame could make his move, Sarah dived down, grabbing the largest piece she could find. As he lunged at her, she swung the jagged glass upward, straight into his neck. Kwame's eyes widened in shock. He stumbled back, his hands flying to his throat as blood gushed between his fingers. Gargled gasps escaped his lips as he staggered, his knees buckling beneath him. His body swayed for a moment before collapsing onto the floor with a sickening thud. Sarah stared, chest heaving, as his body twitched, then went still. The only sound in the room was the rapid pounding of her heart. She had done it. She had survived. But she wasn't safe yet. Shaking, Sarah forced herself to move. She dug through Kwame's pockets until she found the key. With trembling hands, she rushed to the door, unlocking it and stumbling out into the cold night. She ran. She didn't know where she was going, but she didn't care. She had to get as far away as possible. Somewhere in the distance, she heard the sound of approaching sirens. Amaka must have called the embassy. Tears of relief streamed down Sarah's face as she ran toward safety, leaving behind the man who had lured her into a deadly trap. She had fallen in love with a monster, but in the end, she had been the one to end him. The sun had just begun to rise over Accra as Sarah sat in the cold, sterile office of the Nigerian embassy. A blanket was draped over her shoulders, but she still shivered, not from the cold, but from the trauma of the past 24 hours. Her hands trembled as she wrapped them around a cup of tea, but she barely tasted it. The events of the night played over and over in her mind like a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. The lies, the trap, the fight for her life. The moment she took his. She had survived, but at what cost? Ghanaian police officers moved in and out of the office, gathering statements. When they arrived at the house, they found more than just Kwame's body. Hidden in a locked room were multiple passports belonging to different women, each one a possible victim of his dark schemes. Some of them had been reported missing. Others had never been found. Kwame had been a predator, a man who used online romance to lure women to Ghana, only for them to vanish without a trace. Sarah had been his next target, but she had fought back. 2 days later, Sarah was officially cleared of any wrongdoing. The authorities ruled her actions as self-defense, and after days of questioning and legal procedures, she was finally allowed to go home. As she boarded the plane back to Nigeria, a wave of emotions hit her. Relief, grief, fear. She had come to Ghana for love. She was leaving with scars, both seen and unseen. When she landed, Amaka was the first to greet her at the airport. Sarah fell into her best friend's arms, sobbing. "You're safe now," Amaka whispered. "You're home." But as Sarah closed her eyes, she knew that a part of her would never truly feel safe again. She had survived the nightmare, but she would carry it with her forever.